Welcome back to the deep dive. And I have to say, today is a little bit different. We are tuning in specifically to what we're calling the Funeral Channel Network edition of the show.
It sounds a bit grim when you say it like that, doesn't it? But it is one of the most fascinating human and complicated spaces we ever get to explore.
It really is. I mean, usually when we think about funerals, we think about the service, the flowers, maybe the eulogy. We think about the person who has passed away. But today, we are wading into the weeds. We are looking at the paperwork, specifically the obituary,
The final edit.
the final edit. And before you tune out thinking, oh, paperwork, boring, let me tell you, this document is an absolute minefield for the living. You realize pretty quickly that you aren't just summarizing a life. You are navigating a political landscape.
It is the place where public record meets private pain. That is the best way to describe it.
Exactly. So here's the central dilemma we are grappling with today. You have, let's say, 500 words, maybe less, because newspapers charge by the inch and that gets expensive fast.
Very fast.
You have 500 words to sum up an entire human existence, and then you hit the question that keeps people up at night. Do you include the person they divorced 20 years ago?
The ex-spouse. The elephant in the room.
The ex. The person they maybe built a business with or maybe haven't spoken to since the day they signed the papers. Or maybe the person who broke their heart and left them with nothing but a cat and a mortgage. Do they get a mention in the final summary of the life?
It is a question that seems like a simple etiquette issue on the surface, like knowing which fork to use at dinner. But as soon as you scratch that surface, you realize it isn't about manners at all. It is about history, it is about truth, and it is about managing the pain of the people left behind.
And to guide us through this, we're looking at a really comprehensive guide titled Legacy and Lineage, Navigating Ex-Spouses in Obituaries, which draws on some heavy insights from the funeral program site.
And what I love about the source material is that it doesn't treat this as a rule book. It doesn't say always do X or never do Y. It describes the obituary as quietly controversial, which I think is the perfect phrase.
Quietly controversial. I like that. It feels like a very polite British way of saying knife fight in the parking lot.
Essentially, yes. It frames the obituary not just as a death notice, but as a map for navigating emotional territory. It is about balancing historical accuracy, what actually happened in this person's life, with emotional sensitivity for the people reading it.
So our mission today is to help you, the listener, understand how to walk that tightrope. Because the reality is, if you are an adult, you are likely going to have to help write one of these someday. And nobody teaches you how to do it until you are sitting there grieving with a deadline.
You will. And the key takeaway, if we want to start with the headline, is this. An obituary is a public record, yes, but is not a biography. And it is definitely not a deposition. Its purpose is remembrance, not reconciliation.
I think that's going to be our mantra today. Remembrance, not reconciliation. Because, as we'll see, a single preposition, just a tiny word like with or and, can actually start a family war.
It really can.
And we're going to talk about why omitting someone isn't the same thing as lying. So let's dive into the first segment. Let's define the beast. Why is the obituary so hard to write? I mean, why can't we just list everyone person ever met and be done with it like the credits of a movie?
Well, if we look at the source, they break down the 5 core purposes of an obituary. And understanding these is the only way to make a decision about the ex-spouse. Because if you don't know what the document is for, you can't decide what goes in.
Okay, walk us through them. What are we actually trying to achieve here?
First, it's a formal death announcement. That's the functional part. John Doe died on this date.
Simple enough?
Second, it's a summary of life and character. Third, and this is the sticky one, it identifies key relationships.
Ah, okay.
Fourth, it gives service information. You know, the funeral is Tuesday at 10. And fifth, it preserves a public record.
Okay, so identifying key relationships, that sounds straightforward. But key is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is doing all the lifting. The force emphasizes that an obituary is not meant to revisit conflict. It is not meant to justify life choices. If Uncle Bob made a bad decision in 1995, or a series of bad decisions, the obituary is not the place to explain why he did it or who was at fault.
Right. It's not a therapy session, and it's not a tell-all memoir.
No. And it's not a comprehensive biography. A biography has a duty to be exhaustive. A biographer has to turn over every stone. An obituary has a duty to be respectful. Its primary function is remembrance. So if including a name distracts from the remembrance or clouds the remembrance with anger, It might be failing its primary purpose.
That's a really helpful distinction because I think people get hung up on the truth. They think, well, he was married to her, so if I don't write it down, I'm lying.
Exactly. But you don't list every car he bought. You don't list every house he rented. You edit for the story you are telling.
But why does this specific issue, the ex-spouse, pop up so constantly? Is it just because divorce is common?
Divorce is common, yes. But it's also because we live long lives. People live entire lifetimes within a marriage that eventually ends.
That's true. You could be married for 20 years, have 3 kids, start a company, and then get divorced. And then live another 20 years.
Exactly. And that ex-spouse isn't just an ex. They aren't just a failed romance. They are the co-founder of the business. They are the other parent to the grieving children. They might have been the primary caregiver for decades.
So you have this clash. On one side, you have families wanting to be accurate. This person existed. They were huge. On the other side, you have sensitivity. We don't want to talk about them because it hurts. You have public perception versus private truth.
And often you have the deceased's wishes versus the survivor's feelings. And that is a brutal conflict because the person who died can't vote anymore, but the people paying for the funeral, the ones writing the check, are the ones who have to live with the document.
So let's break this down into scenarios because the source material does a great job of categorizing this. It's not one size fits all. When is it appropriate to include the ex? When should you actually fight the family to keep that name in there?
The first and most compelling scenario is what we call the co-parent, or the legacy argument.
This is the lineage piece.
Yes. If you erase the ex-spouse, in a very literal way, you are erasing the origin story of the grandchildren.
Play devil's advocate for me here. Let's say I'm the son. My dad died. He hated my mom. They had a terrible divorce. Why does she need to be in his obituary? I know who she is. I don't need the newspaper to tell me.
That's a fair pushback. But think about your children, or their children. An obituary is often the first place a genealogist or a curious great-grandchild goes to understand the family tree. If they look at your dad's obituary and it lists you, but it doesn't list your mother, where did you come from?
I just appear out of the ether.
You appear as a biological anomaly. Or worse, if your dad remarried, the record implies you are the child of his second wife.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so if I leave my mom out to save my dad's feelings, I'm accidentally rewriting my own biological history.
Exactly. It creates a gap in the record. The source argues that shared parenthood is the most common and robust reason to include an ex-spouse. It clarifies lineage for future generations.
But I can hear a listener saying, yeah, but they hated each other. It was a messy divorce.
And that is valid. But the inclusion here isn't about their relationship to each other as lovers or partners. It's about their relationship as co-creators of the family. You can acknowledge them as a foundational part of the family story without implying they were best friends at the end.
So it's purely functional in that sense. It's stating a biological fact for the sake of the record.
Precisely. It prevents confusion about who the parents are.
Okay, what about scenario B? What if there aren't kids or the kids are grown? What about history?
This is the significant role scenario. We talked about those 20-year marriages. Let's say a woman was married for 25 years. She and her husband built a successful chain of restaurants. They traveled the world. He supported her through grad school. Then they divorce. 5 years later, she dies.
To leave him out feels like you're deleting 25 years of her life.
Exactly. The source notes that omitting this person can make the life story feel historically incomplete. You are telling a story with a massive hole-in-the-middle plot. Imagine watching a biopic of Steve Jobs and they just cut out the Wozniak years because they had a falling out. The story doesn't make sense anymore.
It's a resume gap.
It's a life gap. And sometimes, and this is touching, the ex-spouse comes back.
Right. That happens more than people realize.
The caregiving aspect, yes. Sometimes, when someone gets sick, an ex-spouse steps back in to help. Maybe not as a romantic partner, but as family. Because they know the person better than anyone.
Wow. So they show up for the chemo appointments.
They do. If an ex-wife spent the last 6 months changing bedpans and driving to doctor's appointments, ignoring her in the obituary feels dishonest to the reality of those final years.
It feels ungrateful almost, like you're taking the labor but refusing to acknowledge the person.
It does. It feels like rewriting reality to suit a narrative, rather than honoring the actual support system that existed.
Okay, so that's legacy and history. What's the third scenario for inclusion?
This one is the simplest, ethically speaking, but often the hardest for families to swallow. Scenario C, the deceased's request, autonomy.
Did they leave a note?
If the deceased left written instructions, maybe in a pre-need file at the funeral home, or in a letter to the executor saying, I want my ex-wife Jane mentioned, or I want to be listed as the former husband of Sarah, that carries massive weight.
Even if the current wife or the kids don't like Jane. Even if Jane is the villain of the family dinner table.
The source argues that respecting the deceased's specific preferences is the most ethically grounded approach. Remember, this is their life we are summarizing. It's their final bow. If they maintained an amicable relationship, or if they just felt that person was part of their identity, overruling that because it makes you uncomfortable is, well, it's problematic.
It's taking the pen out of their hand.
Exactly. It's a power play.
Okay, but let's flip the coin, because I'm sure there are listeners screaming at their speakers right now saying, no way.
Yeah.
There are definitely times where including an ex feels wrong. Not just awkward, but actually harmful.
Absolutely. And the source is very clear on this. We aren't saying always include.
Yeah.
There's a strong case for exclusion, and it usually stems from protection.
So scenario A for exclusion, trauma.
Yes, we have to be real here. Not all marriages end because people grew apart or wanted different things. Some end because of abuse. Some end because of addiction, abandonment, or violence.
If a woman escaped an abusive marriage, literally ran for her life, and then passed away, putting her abuser's name in her obituary.
Would be an act of cruelty. It would be a final violation.
Yeah.
The source details that when there is a history of abuse or unresolved legal battles that cause deep pain, omission is not denial. It is an act of protection.
Protection. I like that framing. It's not hiding the truth, it's shielding the legacy.
The obituary should not re-traumatize the surviving family. If the children reading that obituary are going to have a panic attack, seeing that name, you leave it out. The obituary is not a venue for reopening wounds.
It's not a court record where you have to list every defendant.
Correct.
What about scenario B, the surviving spouse? This feels like the most common friction point. The second wife or second husband syndrome.
It is. Imagine you are the widow. You've been married to this man for 10 years. You built a life. You nursed him through his illness. You are planning the funeral. And someone suggests listing his ex-wife from 30 years ago.
That would sting. It feels like you're sharing the spotlight at your own husband's funeral.
The expert view here is that seeing an ex-spouse's name can feel diminishing or disrespectful to the person standing there at the grave, especially if the previous marriage ended long ago.
It creates a visual equivalency that doesn't exist in real life.
Exactly. You list survived by his wife, Mary, and his former wife, Susan. It puts them on the same line. Textually, they look equal. It flattens the hierarchy of the relationships. The rule of thumb here is, do not unintentionally undermine present relationships to honor past ones. The living take precedence in this specific context.
That makes sense. Prioritize the people who are currently grieving, the ones who are actually feeling the loss right now.
Yes.
And the third scenario for exclusion.
Irrelevance. The ghosts from the past.
The high school sweetheart.
The marriage that lasted 2 years in their 20s. They're now 85. They haven't spoken since the Nixon administration.
Does that person need to be there?
No. Inclusion there creates confusion rather than clarity. People reading it might think, wait, who is that? Were they still in touch? Was there something going on?
The source reiterates that obituaries are not obligated to list every relationship. Only the ones relevant to the story being told right now.
It's editing. You edit a film to tell the story. You edit an obituary to tell the story. You don't keep the deleted scenes in the final cut.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've decided, let's say we've decided to include them. We're in the inclusion camp. Maybe it's for the kids. Maybe it's for history. Now we have a tactical problem. How do you say it?
The linguistics of death.
It sounds like a metal band.
Yeah.
But seriously, words matter. How do we do this without making it sound like they are still married? Or without sounding bitter? Let's do a little workshop here. I'm going to give you a bad sentence and you fix it.
I love this. Let's do it.
Okay. Attempt number 1. He is survived by his wife, Linda, and his beloved first wife, Karen. Ooh. Hard no. Beloved is a loaded weapon there. Unless Linda is a saint and Karen is also a saint and they all lived in a commune together, that is going to cause a riot.
Okay, strike beloved.
Yeah.
What about? He is survived by his wife, Linda, and Karen, the woman who broke his heart in 1999.
Also no. That's the airing dirty laundry approach. That's using the obituary as a weapon.
Okay, so what's the fix? How do we be neutral?
The source gives us some really powerful tools here. The key is neutrality. You want to state the fact without adding emotional color. So option 1 is the dry and factual. You simply say, former spouse of name.
John Doe, former spouse of Jane Doe.
It's clean. It defines the legal status perfectly. It doesn't imply love. It doesn't imply hate. It just implies history. It says this happened.
Okay, what if you want to acknowledge the timeline?
Then you use option 2, preceded in marriage by. This is often used when the ex-spouse has already passed away or to show that this happened before the current situation. But you have to be careful with phrasing so it doesn't sound like preceded in death, which is a specific term.
Right, preceded in marriage sounds a little biblical.
It can. A better version might be focusing on the timeline of the life. But honestly, the best option, especially if there are kids, and this is the gold standard, is option 3.
Which is?
Focus on the result of the union. Anchor the ex to the children.
Ah, so you don't anchor the ex to the deceased.
No, you anchor them to the next generation. So it would read, he is survived by his children, Jack and Jill, whom he shared with his former wife, Sheila.
I really like that because it explains why Sheila is in the sentence.
Exactly. It validates the lineage argument we talked about.
Yeah.
It tells the reader, Sheila is mentioned here because she is Jack and Jill's mother, not necessarily because she was the love of his life. It protects the current spouse's feelings because Sheila is now grammatically attached to the kids, not the husband.
It's a really elegant grammatical solution to a massive emotional problem.
It is. And the source emphasizes what to avoid. This is crucial.
What are the don'ts?
Avoid emotionally loaded language. We talk about beloved, but also estranged. Don't write his estranged wife unless you're trying to make a legal point. And avoid unnecessary explanations. You don't need to say, married for 20 years until their divorce in 1990. You don't need the dates. Just say, former spouse.
Keep it brief.
Clarity without emotional implication. That is the goal.
Okay, let's unpack the fallout. Because you can write the perfect sentence, you can have the best intentions, and you can still cause a massive family brawl. We need to talk about the ripple effect.
The emotional and cultural blast radius of an obituary.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on the current spouse, but what about the kids? Specifically, stepchildren versus biological children. This feels like the place where the most damage happens.
It is. This is where it gets incredibly messy. Stepchildren often feel displaced. If the obituary focuses heavily on the first marriage and the biological kids, maybe listing the ex-wife because history, the stepkids can feel like they're being written out of the will, emotionally speaking.
Right. If I've called this man dad for 20 years, but the obituary focuses on his first family from 30 years ago, I feel invisible.
Exactly. And conversely, if the step-parent writes the obituary and leaves out the biological mom,
The biological kids feel like their history is being erased. You're trying to pretend our mom didn't exist.
we see this all the time.
Yeah.
Adult children feeling torn between loyalty to their surviving parent and the memory of the deceased parent. It puts them in an impossible bind.
And the fear is real. The source mentions that families are often paralyzed by the fear of public judgment.
They are. They are terrified that if they leave the ex out, the town gossip will say, oh, look how petty they are. But if they put the ex in, the town gossip will say, oh, look, they're disrespecting the new wife.
You can't win.
You can't win the gossip game. That's why the guiding question has to be internal. It can't be, what will the neighbors think? It has to be, what best honors the deceased while minimizing harm to the living?
That's a hard pivot to make when you're grieving, to turn off the external noise.
It is, but it's essential.
Let's talk about culture and religion, because that adds a whole other layer of pressure. This isn't just about feelings. For some people, it's about souls.
Massive layer. The source highlights that different backgrounds view divorce very differently.
Right.
Take view A. In some religious traditions, strict Catholicism, for example, or certain Orthodox traditions, marriage is a permanent spiritual mark. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Even if the state grants a divorce, spiritually, that connection exists.
So in that worldview, including the ex isn't just polite, it's required.
It's acknowledging a sacrament. Inclusion is expected. To leave them out would be seen as a spiritual lie or a denial of a religious reality.
But then you have view B.
View B is the closed chapter view. In these cultures, the focus is entirely on the current family unit. The divorce severed the tie completely. The ex is now outside the circle. To bring them back in is seen as confused, inappropriate, or even bad luck.
So if you're a mix of these cultures, say a Catholic marrying into a secular family,
Chaos. Absolute chaos.
what's the advice there? How do you navigate a culture clash at a funeral?
Consult. Don't guess. Consult clergy. Consult cultural elders, the matriarchs or patriarchs of the family who know the traditions. Ask them, how is this usually handled in our community? You don't have to follow their advice, but you should know the landscape you're walking into before you print the program.
That's smart. Now, here's a distinction the source makes that I found really interesting. Legal accuracy versus emotional accuracy.
This is one of my favorite points in the whole deep dive.
Yeah.
We often think of the obituary as a legal document, but it's not really.
It's not a death certificate.
No, a death certificate is a legal document. A will is a legal document. Those demand 100% factual, legal precision. You have to list heirs. You have to list assets. An obituary is a social document.
So genealogists hate this, right?
Genealogists struggle with this. They want every name, every date, every connection cross-referenced. They want a database. But the expert point here is legal accuracy does not require emotional completeness.
Unpack that. That feels like a permission slip.
It is. It means you can be legally accurate about who survived the deceased without listing every single person who ever shared a legal bond with them. It is acceptable to prioritize the dignity of the funeral over creating a perfect database entry for Ancestry.com.
That gives people permission to breathe, I think. You're not breaking the law by leaving out your ex-husband. The obituary police aren't going to come arrest you.
No, they are not. You are telling a story, not testifying in court.
So we've looked at the why, the how, and the fallout. Now let's look at the who. Who actually gets to make this call? Because in a divided family, that's the battleground.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Technically,
Yeah.
legally, it's the next of kin, usually the person who signs the contract with the funeral home.
The one paying the bill holds the pen.
Usually, yes. But relying on that technicality, I'm the widow, I'm paying, so I decide, is a great way to ensure nobody talks to each other at the wake.
Right. I paid for the obituary, so I get to erase your mom. That's not going to go over well with the stepkids.
Ideally, you want collaborative decision-making. But if the family is fighting, if the second wife and the first wife's kids are at each other's throats, the source suggests a neutral obituary.
The nuclear option, what does that look like?
Minimal relational detail. You focus entirely on the deceased. John Doe died on this date. He was born in Chicago. He loved fishing and geology. A service will be held on Tuesday. You strip out the list of survivors entirely, or keep it very generic. Survived by his loving family.
Wow, you just cut the whole section.
Sometimes it's the only way to keep the peace. If you can't agree on the list, you don't publish the list.
Or, another compromise the source mentioned, separate personal tributes.
Yes, this is the modern solution. The internet allows for infinite space. We don't have to fight over the same 2 inches of newsprint anymore.
So the official obit is neutral.
The newspaper obit stays neutral. But on the funeral home's website, or a memorial site, the kids can write their own tribute, where they talk about their mom and dad's years together. And the current wife can write her own tribute about their final years. Everyone gets their say, just not in the same paragraph.
That's actually really healthy. It acknowledges that people have different relationships with the deceased.
Yeah.
My dad wasn't the same person to me as he was to his second wife.
Exactly. And both versions can be true.
I want to ask you the big ethical question that the source poses. We touched on it, but I want to drill down. Is leaving the ex out a lie? Because I feel like a lot of listeners struggle with that. They feel guilty, like they're engaging in deception.
The source is very firm on this. Ethically, omission is not deception when done with intention and care.
Omission is not deception.
Think about it. You don't list every job the person ever had. You don't list the time they got fired from Burger King in high school. You don't list every friend they ever made. You select the parts that tell the story of who they were at their core. If the ex-spouse is central to that core, like the business partner, you include them. If they are not, you don't. That's editing, not lying.
That's a relief to hear, honestly. It validates the decision-making process.
But, and there's a big but, you have to check your motives.
This is the common mistakes section, the trap.
Yes. Are you including someone out of guilt? Oh, I have to, or I'm a bad person. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
Relevance should drive inclusion, not guilt.
And the flip side.
Are you excluding someone out of anger? I'm going to show her. I'm leaving her name out. That'll teach her. That is weaponizing the obituary. That is not intention. That is spite.
And spite tends to look ugly in print. It leaves a stain.
It does. It leaves a stain on the memory.
Yeah.
If you allow unresolved conflict to dictate the wording, the obituary becomes about the conflict, not the deceased. And people can tell. Readers can smell the bitterness in the ink.
So check your heart before you check the proof.
Exactly.
We're coming into the home stretch here. I want to leave our listeners with something practical. If someone is listening to this, maybe driving to the funeral home right now or dreading doing this next week, what is the framework? How do they make the decision without losing their mind?
The source provides a compassionate framework. It's essentially a checklist of 5 questions. If you answer these honestly, the decision usually reveals itself.
Okay, hit us. Question 1.
Did the relationship remain meaningful at the end of life? Not, was it meaningful 20 years ago? Was it meaningful now? Even if just through the children, was there a connection?
Okay, question 2.
Does inclusion add clarity or confusion? Will a stranger reading this understand the family tree better? Or will they be baffled? Will they wonder why this person is mentioned?
Question 3.
Would the deceased have wanted this? This is the North Star. If you know the answer, if you really know it, follow it, even if it annoys you.
Question 4.
Does it cause unnecessary pain to survivors? Note the word unnecessary. Some pain is inevitable in grief. But are you pouring salt in a wound? Are you humiliating the widow?
And question 5.
Can neutral language handle it? Can you find a phrase like, mother of his children, that solves the problem without creating drama? Can you write your way out of the corner?
That is such a solid list. It takes the emotion out of the driver's seat and puts logic in there.
It grounds the decision.
I want to briefly mention blended families before we wrap up, because the Brady Bunch scenario is pretty standard now.
It is. And the note here is simple. Clarity matters more than completeness. You do not need to diagram the divorce decree in the text. You don't need to say, stepbrother to X, half-sister to Y.
Just list the kids.
Just list the kids. Survived by his children, A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
You don't need to asterisk them. Love doesn't require an asterisk.
Love doesn't require an asterisk. That's beautiful.
It's the modern reality.
So as we close this deep dive into the Funeral Channel network, what does this all mean?
It means we have to stop looking for a rule book. There isn't one. There is only intention. An obituary is a bridge. It connects the past, what happened to the present, the people grieving.
And the goal is to make that bridge stable.
Yes. It should reflect truth without cruelty and history without bitterness. If you can achieve that, you've written a good obituary.
It's about being an adult, really, putting aside the petty stuff for the sake of the bigger picture.
Ideally, yes.
Here's a thought I want to leave you with, listener. And this wasn't explicitly in the text, but it's been rolling around in my head while we talk. We live in the age of the digital footprint. Everything is recorded: Facebook relationships, Instagram photos, tag posts. The official obituary is losing its monopoly on the truth.
That's true. The internet never forgets the X.
Exactly. So, in a world where the facts are already out there for anyone with Google, does the obituary still hold the power to define a legacy? Or is it just one version of the truth?
That is a fascinating question.
And if you were writing yours today, who would you want included? Not because you feel obligated, not because of the law, but because they were actually part of your truth.
That's the question to sleep on.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Take care.